Hey there, Chris from AVA Distribution. Today I'm going to show you how to program up the Yamaha MTX editor to work with the Yamaha MTX3 DSP. So for this walkthrough I've chosen a scenario based around a hall system or a church system, maybe even a classroom or auditorium. So I'm going to show you the methodology I use to scope, design and program these types of audio systems, and hopefully you can take something out of it. And pretty much the MTX DSPs can cater for so many audio applications. So first of all, we might go out on site and we will scope the system. So in this scenario, I've created, it's going to be a hall. We've asked them what inputs do they want. So they want a lecture mic, maybe a couple of handheld wireless microphones, and then a computer audio source. On the output side, we'll ask them how many speakers they want. So they are after main front of house, left and right, a delay stack, speakers left and right, so down the middle of the venue, and they've also asked for a fallback speaker to hear themselves. As per control, we're going to give them the opportunity to use a digital control panel and then a wireless app as well they can use on their smart device. So now that we've scoped the system, we need to put it into our MTX editor. And what I like to do in this regard is I create a spreadsheet so I know exactly the I/O, what's coming in, what's coming out. So in this particular scenario, it is one room. So essentially that means it's one zone. So you can see here in my Excel spreadsheet, I've already preset it up. This particular hall has a main zone. And you got to think of zones as rooms, essentially. And those rooms might have multiple outputs. In this case, that's exactly what's happening. So we're using 4 outputs here in the one zone. So they also want a fallback, so they want independent volume control. So as soon as you think of independent volume control, it's essentially another room or another zone. Just like a large format digital mixer, the MTX3s work in similar fashion. So we've called this one zone 2 and fallback. So this is so on the programming side we can give them individual volume control over their front of house and over their fallback. So based on the information I have over here, I've entered my inputs in. So the MTX3 has 8 Euroblock mono mic line inputs, as well as 2 pairs of stereo RCA. So in this scenario, I've got my lecture mic on input 1, wireless mic 1 on input 2, wireless mic 2 on input 3, and then my RCA computer audio, which I might take out of a vision switcher, or I might de-embed it out of some kind of vision device, or maybe 3.5mm out of the output of the projector, and I'm running it back to the DSP and plugging it in. So that's the input side. On our output side, in our main zone, zone 1, we're using 4 outputs. So we've got our front of house left and our front of house right. Also, they want a delay stack as well. So they're going to be on MTX outputs 3 and 4. So delay left 1 and delay right 1. So the speakers I'm going to use in this scenario are Yamaha VXS8s. They come in pairs, they come in black and white. We're going to be running this system in low impedance, so we're going to try and get the best oomph out of the speakers and the amplifiers. So these XMV amplifiers over here, this particular model is 4 channels of 140 watt per channel. So that's going to drive our system pretty effectively. And then over here on my zone 2, it's my fallback speaker. So I'm going to be using in this scenario a powered DBR10, a Yamaha DBR10. So we're going to be wiring analog directly out of the MTX3 output 5 and running that through a balanced mic cable with an XLR plug straight into the powered DBR10. All right, so that's how I scope my system ready for programming. So let's jump into the MTX editor now. And I've opened up the device and it's prompted me, what do I want to do? I want to start a new file. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to hit next. In my device configuration wizard, we're going to choose a DSP. And based on our system design, we've also chosen an XMV4140. So we're going to select that as well in the YDIF column. So what YDIF is Yamaha's proprietary bus. The YDIF bus carries 16 channels of audio looped in and out of each Yamaha device. So those in the YDIF column selected, we're going to go next. Now this is where we set our unit ID. So you need your unit ID so your software can communicate with the hardware. So in this particular scenario, in my rack, I've just got an MTX3 set up, and it's on the network, and it's already found its ID number, which you set on the back of each device via dip switch and unit encoders. So there's a little encoder switch. So it's probably going to throw some errors when I go online because I don't have my XMV4140 connected on the network. But essentially, yeah, this is how you communicate the software with the hardware. All right, this is just showing you how to set the unit ID. So you can see here on the DSPs, it's a combination of dip switch settings and encoder selection. All right, you can ping the devices here to make sure that they're visible on the network and you actually are communicating with the right device. So MTX3 is on unit ID 01. All right, this is where you can add your digital control panels. This is your DCP panels. So there's 3 options available. There is a 4 switch, there is a 1 volume 4 switch, and there's a 4 volume 4 switch. In this scenario, we're not going to use any of that. We're going to actually use the digital control panel, the MCP1, which is PoE powered, and all you have to do is connect that into the same network as the MTX3, and then you can communicate with that. As well, we're going to give them the option to have iOS or Android control with the Wireless DCP app, which is one of Yamaha's apps, which is a free download. All right, so let's finish our device config. What you can do is you can display a diagram to print out and take to site to connect all your hardware together, which is very handy because if you do have DCP wall plates, you can have up to 8 per DSP, and see they can loop in and out, and it does show you that all the binary dip switch settings on the back of each wall plate, which is very handy to take to site to program up quickly. Over here on the YDIF column, you can see that we're coming out of the MTX3 into the XMV, then back out into the MTX3. So it's a closed loop. So how YDIF works is the signal keeps traveling around on the bus until DSP spits it onto the bus or an XMV amplifier takes it off the bus. Cool. So now, this is our main page here. You can see that I'm connected to the MTX3 online because it's seeing it on the network, and it's saying that's currently offline, ready that we want to push the session online. So essentially you have the software that you design up and you push that software onto the hardware, do your final programming, walk away, your system's done. You can't see the XMV with that green light or stating offline because I don't have it connected into my network at the moment. So that's how you can see what devices are currently seen on the network. And this is where you can see your digital control panels. All right, cool. So there's one thing we forgot to do, I believe, in our setup. So let's go back to the device config. We forgot to add the MCP1. So let's go back here next. And over here, we got our MCP1 column. So we're going to select one of these. So this is a very nice, aesthetically pleasing digital control panel, which is essentially 6 DCPs in one unit. All right, cool. So you can set the ID of that as well, which is imperative because obviously you have to have the software to communicate with the hardware. So let's just keep going through. We'll finish that again. We won't look at the device config this time. Okay, so our session is here ready to be programmed up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to input, I'm going to go over to my system tab, and I'm going to input my inputs over here into the DSP. So naming is critical. So we're going to go lecture mic. We're going to go wireless 1, and we'll go wireless 2. And then over here in our stereo input 1, we're going to go comp left and comp right. So they're our 4 inputs in this particular scenario. Okay, on our output side, we're using 5 outputs. So we're going to name these outputs over here. So this is the main page of the DSP. The signal travels from left to right through these tabs here. So we're just going to do an initial setup. We're going to name them all. So based on my little Excel spreadsheet over here, this is going to be front of house left, which if we drag that over here, we'll be able to see it a bit better. It's going to be front of house right. So you can see MTX output 1 is front of house left. MTX output 1 over here, front of house left, and so on and so forth. So this is our delay stacks. So delay left, delay right. Finally, our fallback. All right, cool. So we're not using these outputs, so let's just turn them off, turn them down. Just so we know when we look at the system, we know what's going on from first glance. It's very handy. So we can do this as well. We can turn off all these other inputs here. The MTX3 does allow an expander, so you can add another 8 inputs as well, making the total of 16 inputs, mono XLR mic line inputs to come into it. But in this particular scenario, we've only got 4. We've got our lectern, our wireless 1 and wireless 2. So let's just bring those all up to unity, ready to get some signal passing through. All right, cool. So the next step, we've entered our inputs in, we've entered the names of our outputs in, and they've corresponded to our MTX out. So back to the DSP. What we can do now is let's just make sure that our zones are set up correctly. So I'll go to my zone tab, and you can see over here, I am skipping some here, and I'll explain that in a second, because these are finer input control and essentially the matrix tab, which is for essentially visual representation of what's happening in the system. So the very main tabs in the MTX editor are the main, the zone, the router, and the output tab. All right, cool. So we're going to jump to our zone tab, and essentially we've got a stereo front of house and stereo delays. So you can see over here they're set up as mono. So what we can do with the MTX is we can go into System, into MTX Configuration, and we can change our outputs into stereo. We're going to leave our matrix 5 and 6 as mono by 2 because the fallback's going to be mono. Cool, so you can see now that's converted those to stereo. All right, so let's name these front of house left, front of house right, delay left, delay right. Turn those off, turn those down, we don't need them, and zone 5 was fallback. Cool, so we've named our zones now. All right, now we are ready. That's the final step, is now to route our zones to our outputs. So as you can see, zone 1 has 4 outputs, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we need to route those on our router tab. So on our router tab, you can see we've got our zones on the left here, and we're going to correspond them to the actual output channels of the MTX. So this is all entirely still inside the MTX3. So all these tabs refer to all the stuff you can do inside the MTX3. Okay, so let's route those zones to our outputs. So we can see over here that front of house left is routed to MTX out 1. So front of house left, output 1. Let's go over here a little bit more. We've got front of house right routed to, here we go, let's just clean this up a bit. Front of house right to MTX2, so right going down to MTX2, yeah? Delay stack at that particular zone there, output 3. So you can see that they're all naturally matching up, output 4. And then our fallback going out to output 5. Yeah, so it is a bit confusing between zones and outputs. Think of zones as rooms, and those zones might have multiple outputs. So at the moment, it's set up so we can give them individual volume control over their front of house, their delay stacks, and their fallbacks. Say, for example, you wanted to give them one volume control for the front of house and delays. We're going to move them up here like this. So essentially, that front of house zone is now got the delays inside of that one fader because they've been routed together. So you can see delay stack left is going out output 3. So that what you can do there is just give them control of the whole system volume via one fader or one volume knob. So we might leave them just as separate like that for now. So that's pretty much how we pass the signal through. So the signal chain of this particular system, the inputs will come in. They will flow through the channel strip. So we've got our gain at the top, where you can adjust whether it's mic or line, and you can come into your input channel strip. So you can click on these particular boxes down the channel strip and add EQ, add compression, add gates, add feedback suppression, automatic gain control. So when you do click on a box like this, see how it takes you to the input tab? So your input tab is to give you more finer control over your inputs. And you can either select your inputs here to change them, or you can cycle through them up the top here. So in this particular scenario, our lectern mic, we might want to give it some gain, some gate and compression. We might want to give it some feedback suppression too, especially if it's a condenser microphone. And you can auto mix as well. The Dan Dugan auto mixes are built in, so 4 channels for the MTX3 and 8 channels for the MTX5. Very handy to balance and auto mix. All right, cool. So that signal will flow through into the channel strip, do some finer control on your inputs, and then it will flow into the matrix tab. So a lot of people get overwhelmed by the matrix tab, but it's very simple. Essentially, it's just for visual representation. So I've turned every single input off to go to each output. It's a good starting point. It just cleans it all up so you know what's happening. So if I come over here and turn the lecture mic on, you see that that lecture mic has been sent to zones 1 and 2 because I've joined them together as a stereo zone. So if I pan it left, you can see that it won't be sent to the right side. Yeah. If I pan it all the way right, it won't be sent to the left side. So let's bring that back to center. All right, cool. So you can see when you turn those inputs on and off in the matrix, they're essentially sends. So you've got 8 mono sends in the MTX3, but as you can see, we've joined some together because we want them to be stereo. So if I were to turn all these on, you can see they're popping up in zone 1 and 2. If I click matrix 3 and 4, I can turn some on in those as well. So essentially, I don't worry about this page very much. I just use it to set up the initial sort of system and then just come back to it to look what's turned on. Because in a hospitality venue, you might have 8 individual zones and, they might have different inputs playing in each individual zone. So it's a good way to have a look what inputs are turned on and at what volume. So to see the volume, if we turn them on and adjust the send volume fader, you can see that those little green boxes go down and up. So that just sort of gives you a good visual representation. So we're going to put that back to Unity. All right, cool. So in this particular scenario, all the time they would like their lecture mic, their wireless mics, and their computer audio set up into front of house. And delay. Let's chuck them in the delay as well. So as per system default, they want all their inputs to come through the main zone. They want in their fallback to be able to have the freedom to select what they hear. Let's just give them that scenario. So we'll leave those off for the moment because that particular send we will adjust in the control side when we get to the control side. All right, cool. So that's the matrix. So you can see that that signal flows into the main channel strip, inputs for finer control, then into our matrix tab. You see our inputs up the top and our zones on the side. So when we turn these on, they're going to flow into our zones. Once they're in our zone tab, we'll be able to see the signal flow into here. We can do some finer adjustments on our zone tab as well. So say you've got a priority mic and you want to enable ducking, you can say select your lecture mic as priority source 1, and you can adjust the mix level. And you can adjust like when that mic gets spoken into, how much it ducks the music down, for example. So you can do stuff like that as well. So it'll flow through our zone, and then it'll come into our router tab. So you see our zones here and now on the left, and they're going to flow into our outputs. So once they're in the outputs of the MTX3, we can go to our output tab and we can make finer adjustments again on the outputs. So what I really like about using Yamaha speakers with Yamaha DSPs is that the speaker processing is all built in and all the pre-installed library is ready to go. So on our front of house left, for example, we've got VXS8s. So I'm going to go down here and select a VXS8 and bam, it tunes the box. Tightens up the sound. The bottom end response is a lot tighter, which makes for a lot more clear and concise sound. So let's adjust the delay stacks as well. We're also going to use VXS8s in this scenario. So we're going to tighten up the sound. Output 4, VXS8s. Alright, cool. Output 5 is our DBRs. Just having a look in here, they don't have the DBR DSPs set in, but they do have a range of other professional audio speakers within their other ranges, the CBRs, CZRs. Generally more positioned to the passive stuff, whereas DBR is powered. So we might leave our fallback alone. Alright, cool. So you can also do some room EQ, so we can select, again, we can select our different outputs, or we can select them here. And we might, want to do some final EQing on those outputs. The front of house left and right might need a little bit more sibilance, so you might, chuck them up like that. So you can also right click and copy. So you can tune one output and copy it to another, which is handy. So we might just go back here. And we're going to paste that to output 1. So we've reverted it back essentially. Alright, cool. So that's how the signal flows through the DSP. Now, once it comes out the output stage, we want to be able to send it somewhere. So by default, if we go back to our main page, you can see on the output channel strip, it's very similar to the inputs. So if we were to select one of these buttons, we can gain the outputs as well. We can invert them. Within your system configuration, you can make it two-way if you're using 2 outputs to drive 1 speaker. If we click here on the channel strip, it will send us, just like the input, to our output tab. So over here, when we select this particular one, it sends us to our input tab to make finer adjustments. Over here on our output side, if we click this, it's going to send us to our output tab to make finer adjustments. So just quick little navigation tips there. Same as delay, room EQ, speaker processing. So that's one thing we forgot to do as well, is set up our delay time for our delay stack. So usually I just walk this out and just pace it. So say it's 15 meters from front of house to delay stack. I am going to go into my delay left and I'm going to add 15 meters, and that'll automatically delay these speakers by 43.65 milliseconds. So that's going to enable someone sitting at the back to hear the sound travel clearly and not have sort of a ping pong bounce back effect between the 2 speakers. So this is something you can sort of walk around the room and adjust, but it's nice and handy to just be able to chuck in the paced out length here. So 15 meters we use as an example. So both of those we're going to double check. They have been delayed by 43.65 milliseconds. All right, cool. So we are pretty much ready to get some signal happening into the MTX3. All right, so what I like to do is essentially before you can do it before or after with your programming control of how you want to control the system. But for argument's sake, let's go online and let's see some signal come into the MTX. Excuse me. So at the moment, I've got just a stereo source plugged into my stereo 1 left and right. And that's going to give me some signal flowing through. So you can only see signal come into the DSP when you're online. And as you can see over here on the left, drag this over, it's thrown an error. It's told me there's a problem with YDIF. And that's correct because I haven't got an XMV turned on, plugged in, and in the network. So that's going to throw an error there saying on the MTX it'll flash alert 30, which means something's up with your YDIF. Something's not right. So because your software has to match, your hardware has to match the software, otherwise it will throw errors. All right, cool. So now we can see some signal coming in. So let's trace this signal chain. So we've plugged our laptop audio into stereo inputs left and right on the MTX3 DSP. We can go over and select this and make finer adjustments. So you can see the signal coming in. You've also got a bit of digital gain as well you can top up. We're going to look in the matrix tab. So you can see our computer audio has been selected into zone 1, 2, zone 3, and 4. So in our stereo zones, if we were to turn these off, you see they're not being sent anymore. So that's the signal chain there. So now in our zone tab, you can see that we're going to have that signal flow into our zones. So when I do my control, I want to point my control to these particular faders here. So it gives them overarching control over their front of house left and right and their delay left and right. That might not be ideal in this situation. You may just want to give them one volume control. So if we were to route that a bit differently, let's just route our delay stacks into our front of house left and right zone. So it does get a little bit confusing, but if you go back to the zone tab, or back to our matrix tab, we're only going to send those into front of house left and right. So there is our front of house left and right, but we've told that zone to route to outputs 1 and 2, which is our front of house left and right, and 3 and 4, which is our delay. So that means when we say want to give them control of their whole room over one fader, now it's just on one fader, as opposed to giving the end user individual control over their front of house and delay stacks, which is probably not ideal. So let's leave it like that. So as you can see, if I was to take these out, they're not going to flow into the output side of the MTX. So let's leave them like that. And because remember, in our output stage, we've already delayed these. So as long as we got signal coming in, that signal going out will be delayed by 43.65 milliseconds. Cool. So we got some signal coming in. We can see that it's flowing through. So now once it flows through these output faders, we're ready to send it somewhere. So with Yamaha's YDIF bus, let's chuck those outputs onto a YDIF bus. So if we go up here to our EXTIO tab, this is essentially gives us all our sends out. So we're sending out of the MTX now, and we want to either chuck it out of analog output 1. So you can essentially double up. You can wire analog out of the Euroblock connectors out of the MTX3, or you can chuck those outputs onto a YDIF bus. So in this scenario, we're going to chuck outputs 1, 2, 3, and 4 onto YDIF 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you can see they're already pre-configured. So now those are automatically being chucked onto the YDIF bus. We got to tell the amps now to take that signal off the YDIF bus so they can process them. So we're going to go offline to do that. So there's two ways to do it. I like to jump over to my XMV tab because, like the matrix tab, the EXTIO tab I just use for visual representation. So if I go to my XMV tab, I'm going to hit this little edit button up here, and up in the top here I'm going to say, okay, I want you to be output 1. I want you to, channel A is going to grab MTX3 output 1, and let's just double check with our Excel spreadsheet that is correct. So you can see MTX output 1 goes to XMV4140 channel A, so on and so forth. So we want output 2 to go to 4140 channel B. So let's go output 2, output 3, and output 4. So we're going to name these as well. Came out. Delay left and delay right. So a good starting point, I always like to start at -20 attenuation. So that lets 80% of the sound through. It's a good way to never let your system peak, and so when the end user drives the system to full capacity based on what you've given them in the programming, you'll know that that signal, when it passes through, won't peak the amps. But ideally, if you want 100% of the signal to flow through, we want all our amps at 0 dB. So that's going to give us the most dynamic range and the most power and the best utilization of the amplifier. But then you obviously have to balance your gain structure so you're not peaking your amps. Because if you peak your amps too much, they'll go into protection, which is a handy feature. but it means that you're going to get a phone call. All right, cool. So now that signal has been routed into our amplifier. So if we look at the EXTIO tab again, you can see now that output 1 has been chucked onto YDIF bus 1, and the XMV amp is going to take that signal off the bus and process it. So that's our signal chain done. So we can test that again when you have everything online, and you can look in the hardware and you can see that that signal is flowing out the LED output indicators on the MTX3, and you'll see some signal lights light up on the XMV amplifier. All right, cool. So we're happy with our system as is. We've set up the baseline inputs into our zones. So in this particular scenario, we don't need our delay zone, yeah, because in the router tab, we've decided we're going to give them one volume control to control the whole front of house system. So the 2 speakers at the front and the 2 speakers in the middle of the venue on one volume control. Cool. All right, so we're happy with our system. The next step is to save the preset. So up here is the snapshot button. So in the MTX editor, you can save up to 50 presets. So you can have 50 different sort of recalls of different system settings. You know, you might have a scheduler. The MTX3 has a scheduler too, so you can say I want preset 01 to revert back to default 7 a.m. every morning. So let's just make this our default preset, so we're going to call it normal. And that's done. So that preset is looking at the whole system as it is, and this little edit button will tell us if a setting or a parameter has changed based on this initial preset. So if I were to turn this lectern mic down, you'll see that this edit button lights up, which means that a parameter has been changed and it's differing from the preset. So if we hit this little drop down menu, we can essentially recall that preset, and then our fader goes back to where it was. You've got a whole bunch of other cool features inside preset. You've got the recall filter. So you can select individual sections of the channel of the signal chain to say, well, in this preset, I only want you to look at one section, or I only want you to look at these couple of sections. So you can turn them all off or all on. And you can also, you know, do some preset recall filtering on your XMV amp too, as well as your MCP1. All right, cool. So close out of that. We don't want to save it. All right, cool. So you might have a bunch of presets. You know, you might have. I mean, the world's your oyster in this regard. You know, like you can literally create different sort of system settings, and you can recall that with a button on the digital control panel. You can put it on the scheduler to say, you know, at this time I want this preset to be recalled. So I like to have like a system default preset scheduled, say, every morning. So if staff or anyone sort of messes with the system and changes something, you know, every morning that the MTX is going to revert back to its initial sort of setup. All right, cool. Now we get to the fun bit, the control. So this usually takes a little bit of fiddling with the client to know exactly what they want. But essentially in this regard, we're going to keep it nice and simple. We're going to give them essentially volume control. I'm going to overwrite this on the front of house and on the fallback. So they're going to have 2 different volume control settings, one for front of house and one for fallback. And we're also going to give them the ability to turn inputs on and off. So first step, we're going to use the MCP1 digital controller. So we go up here into our control panel. We're going to click on MCP1. So this literally has 6 pages where you can use 6 buttons per page, which is pretty cool. You've also got a home page as well. So on our home page, let's just keep this real simple, and it's just going to be the home page. So we've got, say, 4 inputs and 2 outputs. So you can see up the top here, L1 refers to button 1 on the left. So we're going to make this one our MTX level, zone out level, zone 1 and 2. So this particular button, when we select it, is going to enable us to control the volume of our front of house. So we're going to go over to our label, and we're going to label it up, front of house volume. Front of house volume is shown up there. Okay. So I like to do this step by step. I'm going to save as I go. So what you have to do is you have to save the MCP into a library, and then you bring that MCP library into the preset. So you can have different configurations based on different presets. All right, so with our L2 button, let's skip that for now. Let's go to our R1 button, so the button on the right. So we're going to go MTX, no, we're going to go MTX level. We're going to go zone out level, and we're going to go zone 5. So over here you can double check. What have I got? I made that. Oh no, I've differed it. So I've got out zone. I've made zone 2 there, so that we need to make that zone 5, don't we? There we go. Zone 5. There you go. Finding out things as you go. All right, and we're gonna label that one up. Double click on that and fallback volume. Cool, and we'll save that. All right, cool. Now, for the buttons underneath, let's give them inputs on and off. So, let's choose button L2 for MTX on. So, because this is one venue, and essentially, we could give them individual control of what comes through the fallback, but let's simplify it even more, and let's point these parameters to the very start of the DSP. So if it's turned off, it won't flow through front of house, it won't flow through fallback. So we use that with the MTX on. If you did want to give them individual control, you'd use your MTX send on, so then you can allow the on and off buttons for each individual zone. But sometimes that gets confusing with the end user. If we want a real simple system, let's just point it to the main input channels. So channel 1 over here was our lecture mic, our lectern. So let's spell that correctly. All right, I don't think it's spelled correctly, but who knows. All right, so channel 1, and we're going to name L2 lectern. That'll do. Okay, it save as you go. It's always handy to save as you go. All right. Button 3 down here. Let's skip that one for now. Let's do this button here, R2. And let's make this, actually, no, we'll clean it up a little bit. Lectern mic, and over on R2, let's use computer audio. So we're going to go MTX on. We're going to use stereo input 1, because stereo input 1 is joined together. That's our computer audio. So that will turn on and off stereo input 1. Cool. Now let's label it up. So we're going to call this computer. Right. Now let's put our wireless mics on the bottom. So L3 will make wireless mic 1, and that's on channel 2. So we want MTX on channel 2. And let's label it up. Wireless 1. Save as you go. Alright, R button. MTX on. We want wireless 2, which is on channel 3. So MTX on, input channel on, channel 3. Let's label it up. Wireless 2. Okay it. Save it. Done. So when they go to the MCP panel, they'll be able to select that particular button and adjust the front of house volume. Select this particular button, adjust the fallback volume. And they'll be able to select these buttons and turn inputs on and off. Because we've pointed these to the main section of the DSP, once we turn these off, that signal will not flow through the rest of the DSP. So essentially in this hall scenario, that works out well. All right, cool. So just go back here. All right. So now our MCP library is done. Let's bring that library into the preset. So we've got to go back to our preset, and we're going to double click on MCP1 library. We're going to assign it library 1, which we've created. So now that library is assigned to that preset. and that means when we push the software to the hardware, the MCP1's going to grab its programming and it's going to be all good. Okay, cool. So that's the MCP1 done. Now let's do the wireless DCP. Let's do pretty much a carbon copy. All right. So same deal. Over to our controller. We're going to use the wireless DCP. So essentially, this is an app you can download for free, and you can program it up essentially the same as the MCP1. So you got to create a library, save it as a normal library. We've got 4 switches and 4 volume controls. So we've got a couple of pages we can play with too. So let's, in this particular scenario, let's give them a page of, we'll call this page front of house and fallback. Cool, let's call this front of house volume, fallback volume, and we won't use, actually, what can we do here? Let's think creatively. There for the buttons, so let's not use any buttons, because we're going to let them just use the volume faders to control whether they want their system on and off. So let's call this front of house volume. Over here is our fader. Call this fallback volume. Now let's assign it. So our front of house, we want MTX level, we want zone out level, and we want zone 1 and 2. So that's going to control our front of house. Fallback, we want MTX level, zone out level, zone 5. So remember when I said before we could give them individual control over the front of house and the delay stacks? You could do that, but it might be a bit confusing, because originally we were going to chuck the delays on zone 3 and 4, but decided, nah, we probably won't do that. Let's just include, when we route, let's include those outputs into zone 1 and 2. So essentially one volume fader controls the whole system. Cool. And then they've got an individual volume fader for their fallback zone, their fallback send. So we're going to overwrite that. Cool. So let's go to our next page and let's use this one for input select. So maybe this one here. So let's go lectern. Let's go computer. Oh man, typing. Wireless 1 and wireless 2. Now let's assign those. So inputs page. Let's assign those to our ons again. So input switch 1 was our lectern, that's channel 1. Over here, wireless 1 and 2 is on 2 and 3. So, and computer is on stereo input 1. So computer, let's point you to stereo input 1. Wireless 1 and 2. Wireless 1 is on my channel 2. And wireless 2 is on channel 3. Bam. Alright, done. Save. Cool. So that means if you've downloaded the app and your phone's on the same network and you open the wireless DCP app, you should see these pages, because they're the ones programmed. You'll see page 1 called front of house and fallback, and you'll see page 3, which is our input select. So on the app, you can control the system. So you can go to your input page and swap inputs, or you can go to your front of house fallback page to adjust the volumes. So, we could use these buttons up the top here and put it all on one page, but I just decided in this scenario to segregate it. Cool, so now that that's programmed, let's add that wireless DCP library into our preset. So we're going to double click on the wireless DCP and we're going to add it inside. Cool, so that completes it. So now the final thing to do is to go online and check that all your signals are passing through where you want them as a default, because this is going to be our default preset. And then once you're online, this is the last step where you'll make all your finer adjustments. So you'll be able to see the signal flow through the DSP. You'll be able to say, okay, well, it needs a bit more bottom end, so I'm going to boost the bottom end up here. And every change you make, remember to overwrite your preset. So you keep that change. So that'll just in real time communicate with the hardware and adjust those parameter changes. So then when you do go offline, the MTX is all programmed and done. So whether they switch the unit on and off or whether there's a power outage, you'll know that that default preset will have all the parameter settings that you've done. So just remember, once you go online and do the final sort of commission and the final program, you want to make sure that you update your preset. Otherwise, if you forget to, you might make all these changes and then go offline, then they might lose power and turn the DSP back on, and all those changes haven't been saved to the preset, and therefore you've lost them all. So, we might adjust some of our gains. We might, adjust some of our EQ on our microphone. Let's roll off the bottom end so it's not as boomy. In our matrix tabs, like, okay, as per default, what do you want? Well, we want everything turned on as per default. There's that alert saying that the MTX3 can't find the XMV or the MCP1 because it can't see it on the network. And so, yeah, looking at our matrix tab, we can see, okay, well, these inputs are turned on to front of house. What do we want to put in fallback? By default, let's just turn them all on, which means if they're all turned on, when the controllers turn these on and off, that signal will then, doesn't matter about the matrix tab, it won't even flow into the matrix tab. So essentially, when they control the system, they won't even see or hear that stuff unless it's been turned on. So as soon as we turn that on, you can see that that's going to flow into our particular zones. So in this scenario, we're just giving them control of on and off of the whole system. So if they can't hear it in the front of house, if they can't hear it in the fallback, it means they haven't turned it on in their controller. So in our zone tab, we're using our main zone front of house, and our delay stacks we've decided we're going to put that on the 1 volume fader. So let me just grab my phone and I'll get the Wireless DCP app and we'll see if we can see those zones move up and down with the control of the Wireless DCP. So I've opened up the app, it's found the MTX3 on the software. It's asked for a pin. I haven't set a pin, right? So you can just hit send, which will connect you in. So you can see that our Wireless DCP, very basic, has been set up so we can see our 2 volume faders there for front of house and fallback. And then if we go to our other page, so there's a little page button up the top, we can go to our inputs page there, and there's our 4 inputs there. So if I'm gonna select lecture 1 input, you watch the DSP, it'll turn off. Okay, where are we? Front house and fallback. Let's adjust the volume there. You can see the zones move up and down as sort of control that. So on our page, let's try the inputs page again. And I think I need to update my app. But essentially, that control there gives them control over the fallback. You can see that in the software. And over the front of house, so that's controlling our zones. So the same will apply to our MCP1. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the methodology I use. So I'll scope the system out, and then I'll bring that scope into an Excel spreadsheet, which just makes it easier to program. And once I'm on site and online and making all my finer adjustments and I'm happy with the system and I've tested the control and everything's pointed to the right parameters, I will do my final preset save. And then I will go offline because I am done. And then I will save my whole session. So I'll call this test session. Cool. And that is pretty much it. So yeah, with this DSP, you can do a load of functions. You can do 8 zones hospitality venue. You can, link particular zones together like we have in this hall, auditorium, classroom setting. You can do funky things with the presets. So you can enable the router to change, so you can join classrooms together. You can have individual classroom mode. You could have 3 classrooms joined together into one zone. You can all do this with the MTX3. And you can also, don't forget, you can use the scheduler as well. So like I said before, we can add an event. Let's recall preset 1, and we want to make that preset recall at, say, 7 a.m. every morning. So weekly, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, for example. Save that, and then that's repeated. So every day at 7 a.m. it's going to recall the preset back to default. So we can do funky little things like that as well. So yeah, I hope this tutorial was helpful. Probably dragged on a little bit, but as the nature of programming. Any questions, happy to give me a call at the office. AVA Distribution, I'm in the Brisbane office. And yeah, if you need help designing or scoping or programming, happy to help. That's what we're here for. So appreciate your time. Thanks for tuning in. Cheers.